Hey there, welcome back to The Well Balanced Mind. I'm Shannon Rollins, your host, and in this show we talk about insights to understanding your mind, your emotions, and living a happier, healthier life, inside and out. And I'm so excited today for our special guest, AJ Gantt. And AJ Gantt is a parenting coach with Eat, Love, Parent. And today we are going to be talking about positive parenting and some of the things that we've been hearing, especially post-pandemic, through the pandemic, of all of these parenting struggles that people might be going through. And I'm really happy to have you today to really share like some insights and how you can help some of the audience out. Thanks for coming.
I'm excited. I'm ready to get started.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first I want to ask, because we are all of us are kind of going back to work, but there's a lot of people that I'm still hearing about that are still working remotely and stressed out. Parents are so stressed out throughout all of this chaos and everything that's happened. What are the most common things that you've been hearing from parents and the struggles that you've been hearing from people that you've been helping them out with?
I don't think this is pandemic specifically related, but always that work-life balance thing at any age with any kid tends to be a conversation. So it's summer, so how do I manage my going back to work life and the kids are out of school, or one parent's working, one parent's not. But those situations happen, I think, all the time in life.
Yeah, they do.
I think it's just accelerated or more focused right now because we just had the opportunity for things to shift and people weren't quite ready for it. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of really fun things that can be done, especially in the summer, going outside, all those good fun things. But also in parenting, how do you maintain that balance in the house? There's lots to it.
Yeah, I know. I feel like we need to break this out into more than one episode. You're right. Work-life balance has always been a thing, and it's interesting because we know that it's hard to exist in a work-life balance culture because everything seems so imbalanced. And I mean, when we think about creating balance with children, and especially remote working, because I've heard some people are working more remotely. Like, how do you navigate that? And you specifically in your business, you're a business owner, and in your family, some things that you implement for that.
So this is a really fun story. So way back when, I've always worked remotely. I've always had the at-home style business. And my daughter is 7 now. She's almost 8. And when we were moving across the country to Florida, she stayed with my family for a couple weeks so we could finish moving things, shipping, blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, so I get home after these 2 weeks, and she was staying with my brother and my sister-in-law, and she comes home, and we sit at the dinner table, and she looks right at me, and she goes, "Mommy, how come you don't work?" I'm all, "Excuse me?" But she's like 5, so does she really know what it means? So I was like, okay. So you can take this scenario 100 different ways, right? So here I am, stressed out, trying to get everything together, still trying to work, trying to move things across the country, and I have a 5-year-old in front of me who goes, and so I asked her, I was like, "Well, what do you mean Mommy doesn't work?" Yeah. Well, Aunt Elena and Uncle David, they had to do their schedule thing. They both have very intense jobs, and if they don't schedule their time appropriately, then no one is home to help out with Adela. Mm-hmm. Here, on the other hand, Adela has grown up with me, always being home. So she didn't even understand. She didn't know that she worked. I was like, but wait, I still provide for you. Like, where do you think your clothes come from? Yeah. Why do you think we still have food on the table? But it was a really fun conversation. So the point of this is, as an adult and as a child, they're allowed to have those conversations with you. Yeah. But you're also allowed to decide how you want to respond to those conversations. Yeah. I immediately could have been like, "What do you mean I don't work?" All that kind of stuff. But instead, I let her share her piece. Yeah. We had the conversation, and then she was allowed to be introduced to the fact that some parents get to stay at home all the time and have the blessing of being near their kids all the time and have that lovely situation with them. And then some don't, but some may or may not want the other way. So then the pandemic happens, and now roles may be reversed or flip-flopped, and then how do you deal with those stresses and challenges? And so there's a lot of tips to making sure that the kids are aware of your schedule, and then holding your own boundaries. I mean, it's a huge thing to hold your own boundaries. Nope, this is work time. If you need me, it needs to be emergency. Slip a note under the door. Or one of the big parenting tips, which I think everybody should know, is one-liners. They're my favorite. I will tell you my favorite. It works every time. It doesn't matter what age the kid is. It doesn't matter what age the other human being is. Let me be very clear on that.
So we can use this on other adults. Okay, good. So we're clear.
Let me be very, yes. And it is, I love you too much to argue.
Oh, I love that.
It's a way to say I agree, but I disagree without being rude. And all they're really hearing is you tell them that you love them. And either maybe now is not the time, they're interrupting and they shouldn't be, you agree to disagree. I mean, it could be a handful of different ways for you to diffuse a situation without getting too much. And, you know, honestly, even if you don't know the person, what's the worst thing you're going to say to them? I love you?
Yeah. What a travesty.
You know?
Oh my gosh.
Even, you know, I love you too much to argue. And I think that helps coping in relationships, period, but also some of the self-talk that parents tend to go through. And if you say that enough, even to your kid or to the other person, then they can start having that positive recycle in their head. I love you too much to argue. So you get into any sort of negative situation and you're not happy with, heck, the clerk at the grocery store. Okay, I love you too much to argue. What are you saying? I love you and I love me.
Yep.
And so
that's that reflection, right?
Yeah. And so it's really easy. And kids, they freaking love it. And I've obviously talked about Adela, so I'll talk about her a little bit more. And she was probably 5, maybe 5. And she goes, Mom, I love you too much to argue. I'm like, good. I love you too, sweetheart. So
how can you be mad at that?
It's a perfect way to not. Yeah. But it shows that not only has she responded to it growing up, because that's the way it is in our household, but it also shows that she has that positive self-talk in there instead of going down some sort of spiral, which I think, unfortunately, happens when a lot of people are stressed out, parents specifically. Then we stress out the kids, or the kids stress us out, or, you know, it's a very cyclical cycle in that way. So, you know, you just have to laugh and love it, but one-liners are the perfect way to allow the space of the conversation to either be continued later or to just lay to rest.
Yeah, and I want to touch on what you just mentioned with the language, because kids pick up your language. If you are like, absorb it immensely. And then down the road, 30 years later, 40 years later, 50 years later, and there's some type of block coming up, and it could be from language. Like one just minor example that's not even related to parenting that I think of is money. Money huge. Mindset. Money doesn't grow on trees. All these little language things that we think aren't a big deal as an adult telling a kid, but a child's like soaking that in like a sponge. And do you usually teach with the parenting all of those positive type of reframes that you can explain these negative situations that are bound to happen as a parent?
Well, yeah, and they happen. I mean, my favorite type of, so two things. My favorite type of client is actually the teenage realm. By the time they're like 12, 13, they have this really fun personality, and they're making a lot of really big choices that as parents we think we know, but we don't always know. Yeah. And you see them blossom into what they're potentially going to do for a very long time. Yeah. And if you're not in tune enough, or you don't have the positive language in the house to be able to encourage that, you could be stifling a dream without even knowing it. Like, they don't even sometimes know how to verbalize what they really think they want to do. Yeah. And then you get there and you're like, well, if I would have known that then, you know, like hindsight 2020 thing, and you don't really want to do that with them. So how do you create those positive languages? And money at that age becomes a huge thing, because that's about the time they want to go to the movies or to the mall or hang out with friends.
And explore who they are and what they enjoy on their own without mom and dad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so knowing how to just stay positive in some of those things. And I mean, the bottom line too is that you always, or I hope everybody wants to, have the kids be able to come to you even at 30 years old and be like, but mom, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. Okay. And a lot of that does happen, or dad, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And, like, even in our house, Adela will tell things to dad that she won't tell to me, and vice versa. And I think that it's really important to have a healthy dynamic, even if you're co-parenting, so you don't have both parents in the household all the time, knowing that you can have the opportunity for the child to come to either of you or both of you to share some of these things, especially at that age. And like you said, the language piece of how do you reframe that. So yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do, and that's what one-liners are for. And believe it or not, statistics do show that as early as 18 months old, the kids start responding to your language. So the other thing too, to remind everybody of, is the word no just needs to be taken out of your language for the most part. No can be a very, very powerful word when it's used correctly. But even at 18 months old, don't get into the cabinets. Don't get into this. No, no, no. I can help teach other ways to redirect that energy so they're not hearing no, no, no from the very beginning of their life, because they're going to hear the word no from plenty of other people. Why does it have to be you? Let's find another way to create the redirection or channel the energy. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm getting, do you see I'm getting excited? I want to jump up out of my chair. And the reason I get excited about this topic is because I'll work with people with hypnotherapy who have gone through the no. So I see the aftermath of everything, that you're in a state of fear all the time. Someone's always in a state of fear because they shouldn't, or I'm bad. I'm a bad person because I keep doing bad things. It's because you haven't done anything bad. It's because I'm not saying this could be the cause, but I'm saying with some people, it is a part of creating that subconscious that we have, and that language running in the background, that no, no, no. Like, be careful to me means like, oh my gosh, why do I need to be careful? What do I need to, so you being able to redirect the parents to that point before, it's almost like a prevention. You're preventing and creating this positive aspect in the home. And it's so important. This is an essential job. It really is.
And it's a level of accountability for both parties. So I know that I work with parents and kids, right? But even any relationship, it's accountability for what your language is and what your body's saying, what those trigger words may or may not be. And then being aware of what the other person, this is where I was going to go with this. So let me just cut to the chase. It's not that you're angry or upset with the person. It's the behavior or their choice. And so the language that you use is really critical, because like you said, then you get into this, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not this. And it's not you as the human being that you're talking to. Oh, it might be, but that's a whole nother conversation.
That's not a conversation for today.
But even still, the person that you're speaking to, it's really, you need to be conscious, or I challenge everybody to be conscious of the fact that it's the behavior, the choice, it's not the human being. And that's a big deal. So when parents say, no, don't do this, no, don't do that, oh, watch the way you spend your money, oh, be careful, all those things, it's not really that you want, it's their opportunity and their choice and their behavior. So when we yell in our house, not that we do it very often, but we're human, right? It happens. So I always remind Adela afterwards, and I work with my parents and the kids, so it's really a whole family opportunity, that it's not the human that we're mad at. It was the behavior. It was the choice. It was the way they responded, the way you responded sometimes. And so it's really important to make sure that you're correcting the behavior or the choice and not the actual person.
Yeah. And that's so important to remember, because if someone is yelling, or if they're getting mad at someone else, or whatever the case is in the home, it's just because they're reacting through a state of fear, a state of sadness, a state of stress. It's not their natural state of love that we're all
trying
to be in. Right? We're all meant to be in, but it's okay to have we have emotions for a reason. We do. And so learning not to put down those emotions, but like you said, if it does come up, just embrace, educate, and remind the love in the room.
And that's why the one-liners are so important, is because if things start to explode, it's very easy to lay it to rest for that moment. Like I said before, you either go back to it if you need to, or you agree to disagree and can walk away very easily and lovingly instead of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Well, and I think you can agree on this too. What just came to mind is like sometimes the way that children, and I don't have kids, so I'm loving this conversation. I'm soaking it in.
You can borrow a day.
My dog. Like my dog, sometimes that will be a whole different story for another day, because that is totally different than having a real child. So when it comes to that reframe in the language, kind of what came to mind is like if someone has a child who's really independent and thinks on their own and maybe doesn't want to do.
Do we need to go get her?
But then I think about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, how can this serve her down the road? How can this serve her in adulthood? But how do you kind of see this happen in family dynamics where you want the child to be so like bold and strong the way that some of them are, but you want to foster it at the same time, but how do you manage that without them going out of
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the art of walking away, but being aware.
Yeah.
And that's where the one-liners, again, come in huge. Because you can agree to disagree and let them be on their own and learn. But then they also know you still are keeping an eye on them. They respect that. Because even another piece to some of the coaching is letting them make the decision and letting them fail, but they need to feel it. And every person that you see in history that's successful or appears successful in our opinion, right, had a huge failure right before their level of success.
Yeah.
And so even if it does, in your mind as the parent, come up as like, oh, that's a big fail, I'm not sure they should. And instead of protecting them from it, you do love them through it, hold them through it. And then at the very end of it, you can say, well, was that a good decision or a bad decision?
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's still their choice. So you're educating them from 18 months old on to really evaluate the decision process. And that allows them to have their next step. So if they are bold and intense and they decide to argue with you every day, it's still their choice and their decision. It's also ours to let them get it all out, and then you can say, thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, that's powerful, because you're also teaching them that power of choice.
Yeah.
That they always have a choice. We all have the choices that we make, and everything is if you think about it, I mean, really everything that we have is a choice. And being able to do that, and I know it's hard. I've heard all you moms and dads out there, it is hard to watch a child fail and wanting to protect them before it happens.
But they've got to learn. And the healthiest way for them to learn is while you still have the opportunity to educate them.
Yeah.
Because once they hit that 18, 19, 20-something, they're going to fail, but you can be there to catch them. But the aftermath can often be very different than when they fail at 12, 13, 14. And then at that point, you still have the opportunity to say, okay, let's learn from this. Let's grow from this. Let's have the conversation about this. Where, and money is a huge thing, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know, whatever name brand is popular right now, right? With that, oh, it's $1,000 for this hoodie. Okay, I want to spend $1,000 on this hoodie. At 14, if they have $1,000, A, good for them. But B...
already doing something right.
But B... was that the best decision? For them, it might have been at the time.
Yeah.
When they're 25 and they decide to spend $1,000 on a hoodie instead of paying rent, is that the best decision? Probably not. So let's have that conversation while they're young enough to be educated by you and learn from it,
good. Yeah.
instead of waiting till they don't have a place to live anymore, so they're coming back home. Like, let's.
They're gonna learn on their own regardless, right? So we might as well. What I'm hearing you say is, might as well kind of get this out of the way.
Yeah.
By starting it early while they're still under your roof, while you still have the ability to see them every day. Then. Because once they're off to, I was going to say shipped off, not that we're shipping anyone off, but once they're shipped off to, trade school, college, or just on their own, or just getting a job, whatever it is, like, they're still going to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
It's inevitable.
And I think, too, going back to one of our original conversations about the work-life dynamic, I mean, the blessing and the difference in our house is she's watched me have businesses since she was born. So she doesn't know much different than that.
Right.
Other families, they've always seen their parents go off and go to work. And so the kind of idea of that. So literally being shipped off isn't necessarily a bad term in that sense, because we all have our own path as to what that's going to look like next. And so with the family being home or choosing to be home because of work-life balance stuff, that's a whole nother thing too, is observing everybody at the house at the same time and being able to use some of these tips and tricks to be able to keep everything functioning. So whether you're working from home or whether you go back to work or like leave the house to go back to work, it's a really good example of the level of discipline that's necessary. And discipline, I don't like that word. We choose to use other words. We use the word structure, because then it gives you the boundaries and the presence and allows different opportunities to have structure. So if you have enough structure and use some of these techniques, which I love teaching, then you don't have to have discipline because it's already built into how things run. Yeah. And you do it for your boss. So why not do it at home? You know what I mean? There's a different level of that. But I think, too, a lot of generations that I work with came from the mindset where you had to go to school and then you had to get the what I call big kid job. And that's not always the case anymore. So some of the kids that we're raising now, they may never walk into an office like our parents did, like my parents did. And so it's a really interesting shift in mindset as far as that goes, is how do you, as the parent, adapt to what's coming up because it's not what you're used to. And that helps a lot, too, when you can be open with that kind of conversation. So one of the couple or families that I worked with just 2 weeks ago, that was exactly it. Parents were both teachers, recently had to retire. They were used to waking up at this time, kids going to school at this time. That was just the way that their life was. Well, then they retired, and then this lovely pandemic happens, and now everybody's at home. So here they thought they retired from teaching, and now they have kids at home that they have to teach. And it was this whole other conversation of, well, when I grew up, I went to college, and I did this, and I did that. And I was like, yeah, well, like, love the pandemic, hate the pandemic, it doesn't matter. Things are more online these days than they're not. And
it's just going to progressively be moving into that direction.
Yeah, so that's a whole nother level of balance of how do you, that's the other big thing that I coach on is screen time. How do you balance the screen time?
Well, and especially when you're looking at the gaming and the, switching from online school into wanting to hang out with friends at night online for gaming or whatever it is. I say gaming because that's what I see the majority of the time. But so what would be, let's just say, your number one tip when it comes to screen time, when it comes to that? Because that is huge.
There's this thing that's on most microwaves, most stoves, most cell phones.
Where she's going with it.
It's called a timer. And it works. And then you don't have to keep track of it. And so, and I say that jokingly, but in all seriousness, I'm sure we've all been there. And if you haven't, then you lived in a very different blessed life than I did. Where my mom would say, okay, we're leaving in 5 minutes. And then she goes to talk with her friend. And 5 minutes turns into 10 minutes. And as a kid, you don't know. Oh, mom said 5 minutes. Okay. But the reality is, when it comes to screen time, we're trying to balance that out. A timer is a fantastic tool. Use it. It's simple. It's not
And staying on the structure.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
And we do it too, like even talking about not screen time. So Adela, again, my lovely little human being, we play Uno together often, or we play cards often. And we have had a couple games that just go on and on and on and on because of the way the cards shuffle and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So screen time or not screen time, we still set a timer.
Yeah.
Because if it's our wind down, okay, 20 minutes before bedtime, awesome. 20 minutes. If the game's over in 20 minutes, it's over. If it's not, it's got to wait till tomorrow. Yeah. And a lot of the screen opportunities, is it really going to change between now and tomorrow morning? Is it really going to change in the next hour while you have dinner or whatever it is? No, it's not usually going to change. So whether it's on screen or off screen, the quality time obviously needs to be there. But then being able to say, okay, so allot it out for the day. Okay, you get 3 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, you can break up, at the 13, 14 years old, you can break up your 3 hours however you want. You by then should know how to tell time. So if you want an hour in the morning, an hour at lunch, an hour at dinner, great. If you want 3 hours after you're done with schoolwork, perfect. But that whatever time is agreed on in the household, then that's the time that should be spent on the screen.
Yeah. Well, and then you're also teaching them how to manage their own time. So when they do get older, if they run a business out of their home, for example, or when they're at work or when they're trying to fit exercise into their lifestyle or meal, healthier choices, whatever it is, they're going to know, they're going to bring it back to those moments when they know from the foundation of growing up how to manage their own time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's so much, this is why I love what I do, is that I get to take everybody's scenario and make them better and more fun. And to me, I don't want to call it a game, but it kind of feels like one. Because we get to talk about all this nitty gritty stuff, and then we get to try and put it in this pretty little puzzle. And I'm going to say every time, but maybe that's not the truth. But it feels like it. Every time I feel like there's a level of success or a level of growth and level of expectation that's changed. So whether that's the kid responding, whether it's you calming down, whether it's I just want everybody to put their cell phone in a basket for dinner time, well then get a darn basket. They're like at the dollar store. Just go get a basket.
Make it happen.
But those are the things where the growth and the opportunity and the learning and then being able to still come together in this opportunity of time where everything may feel so distant. The other thing that's really fun, and I know you and I have talked about this before, but that opportunity of transition when they are leaving the house, that 17, 18-year-old mark, to me, that's also really fun because there's a lot of change and a lot of dynamic going on, not only for the tiny human who may not be so tiny anymore, but what happens to, so the family I was just talking about, right, they have teenagers, so 15 and 16, and then they retired, right? So they are in a blessed opportunity to be able to make that happen. But they're also looking at like, oh, well, we would be home while they're at school. Ha, ha, ha. Joke's on them. They have to go to school and we don't. And then this happened. So they didn't, joke's on the whole family. Yeah. But at the same time, they're at that perfect transition age where, they get to that 17, 18, 19-year-old mark and they're choosing what their next step is going to be. Like you said, business, trade school, college, a gap year, travel the world. I mean, the options are there. And
they're endless.
So it's really interesting to work with that dynamic of the family too, because there's just so much change happening. And those are the best scenarios for me, whether it's co-parenting, teenage parents, like veterans coming home, that kind of stuff. So those are really my favorite, is where we have a little bit more of a puzzle to really work with. I'm not saying that I wouldn't work with most people. However, those
that's what you ideally work with the most.
Is people who are in a co-parenting situation, teenage parents who didn't know that they were going to be a parent, whether they are the mom or the dad at that age, 15, 16, sometimes younger, they are forced to grow up really fast. And sometimes they don't have this foundation and they need...
They need some extra help, some coaching. So how can people get a hold of you if they want to work with you?
So if you want to work with me, I would love to have an interview with you and see how well we could work together. My company is Eat, Love, Parent. And email is the best way, eatloveparent@gmail.com, or a phone call or a text message to 970-203-9000, 970-203-9000. And I'm sure that will be in all the details if you didn't
we'll
catch
put it below. We'll put it below in the comments.
Fast, but I'm trying to slow down.
No, you're good. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was a lot of fun. I've certainly learned a lot. I'm sure that all of you have learned a lot too. And thanks so much for joining. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time on the Well Balanced Mind. Thanks.
Thank you.